next big massacre was Wandhama massacre. This was so big that it was difficult for newspapers and television channels, there was only one or two at that time, or political parties at that time, to hide it, because it was so big. It was not 7 odd people killed or 16 odd people killed. This was now 23 Hindus in the town of Vandhama were killed on January 25th, the night between January 25th and 26th January 1998. The victims included 4 children and 9 women. I think at that point, Lashkar-e-Toiba or Hizbul Mujahideen was blamed for the massacre, and I think they had taken responsibility as well. There is lone survivor. Unlike other massacres, there is lone survivor of this massacre, was also the only eyewitness. His name is Vinod Kumar Dhar. He was then a young boy of 14 years. He hid himself in an attic, and it was from him that we heard what had happened on that night in Wandhama. Terrorists struck on the intervening night of January 25th and January 26th of 1998. I think around 25 terrorists in army fatigue descended on this tiny village at about 10 p.m. in the night. It was a Sunday. The terrorists first entered the house of Motilal Bhatt. This was, again, just few families who had decided to stay back after the exodus of 1990. So these were just a handful of families. They found the house of this, a local chemist, Mr. Motilal Bhatt. From here, from his house, all of them entered his house. From here, groups of 4 terrorists were sent to other Hindu houses, and rest were asked to cordon the village. So another gentleman, Motilal, was this person who was a local chemist. He was very well known for his, he treated everyone who came to him with compassion. His family had come from other parts of the, valley for an engagement proposal for one of his children. So there was quite a festive environment in his family. Another Hindu's house, his name was Badrinath. Important to remember these names because these are people who took bullets for us. So it's very important to go through this slowly, remember their names, and go through this history because this is our history and they have been forgotten for too long. So in Badrinath's house, there was a knock, same night. Terrorists clad in army fatigue asked for permission to enter. He thought these were army men. That's what we are thinking. He did not understand that these were terrorists disguised as army. It was only after Wandhama that, many people realized that Pakistani terrorists from Lashkar-e-Toiba and Hizbul Mujahideen and other outfits, they routinely disguised themselves in army fatigue. So for Badrinath's family, it was not unusual for them to have guests come in. And as is common in any Indian family, they invited them in, didn't sense any trouble. The terrorists demanded tea, which was served to them. Around 11 p.m. that night, Badrinath's family came to know that other Hindu families living there were entertaining similar guests. They still did not know what was going on. After the tea was served to them, the family asked them when would they leave. The terrorists assured them that, don't worry, we will all leave. An hour later, a radio set carried by the terrorists turned on and someone on the other side of the radio said, Pura gaon cordon ho gaya hai. Entire village has been cordoned. That was the moment they were waiting for. One of the gunmen stood up and people who had served them tea, they ordered to shoot the family members down. This young 14-year-old boy from the family, Vinod Kumar Dhar, he hid himself, he ran and hid himself in the attic and was not found. And later, many years ago, he told this story. He heard bursts of gunfire and people screaming. He had hidden himself under, I think, heaps of dried cow dung or something is what he said. Within 15 minutes, everything fell silent. And Vinod Kumar Dhar was now the lone survivor amongst 23 Kashmiri Hindus who were killed that day in Wandhama. Terrorists, before escaping, burnt the house of Motilal, the chemist who had initially given them shelter, and they also burned the local temple. In other 3 houses, they had also resorted to indiscriminate firing, and they had killed, and by the time they were done, after the guns fell silent, there were 23 dead bodies lying in 3 or 4 different homes. Vinod Kumar Dhar came to see the fate of his 5 family members. He screamed and shouted. Remember, this is not a big city. This is a very small town. The community, the Muslims in that village who lived, they had all gone to the local mosque. And it was the day that Muslims celebrate before Eid is Shab-e-Qadr. It's called the festival, or the event is called Shab-e-Qadr before. And this is the day they spend, I think, in mosques. The story is that they were so, remember, it's a small town. It's middle of the, if anybody has been to small village towns in middle of winter night, it's very quiet. You know, you can hear, even if somebody is shrieking, even if somebody is screaming, you can hear through the village. You know, it rips through the village, you can hear it. But somehow the story is that at the time the shootings would happen and people were screaming, the loudspeakers in the mosques were the volume was increased. So no one heard. No one heard of the massacre that was happening. Vinod Kumar Dhar went around screaming, the lone survivor went down screaming and shrieking. He could not find one person to help him. Later, 23 pyres were erected, and 14-year-old boy, Vinod, he went from pyre to pyre, consigning all those dead bodies to flames. When journalists visited Wandhama next morning, they say, and I saw a report in Indian Express from that time and many other local newspapers also, they said even the hostile media, even the otherwise hostile media said that the houses looked like slaughterhouses. Bullet-ridden bodies were lying in a pool of blood. And there is this one story that I can never forget, and that gives me nightmares even now, that there were, because remember there were women and children also killed in this massacre. A mother had unsuccessfully tried to save her infant by hiding him in her bosom, in her lap. But both got killed together. The story from one of the newspaper journalists who went there, he said the cop tried to separate the mother and the child after death, and he couldn't. There was burning smell of human flesh everywhere. No convictions, no arrests, no investigation. That's Wandhama massacre.